Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. All right, this book here, and I apologize and jazakumullah khair for your patience. This book here is Imam Ghazali's spiritual biography, wherein he is talking about his journey into spirituality and what he went through. The book that we're using, inshallah, is a book that is translated, but it's called Imam Ghazali's Path to Sufism. That is a title that the author chose. Imam Ghazali himself called it al-Munqidh min al-ḍalāl, Deliverance from error. Um, these are some of the main sections that we're going to be going over, inshallah. There is an introduction, which is what we're going to focus on this week, sort of introduction to what the material is, as well as introduction that he himself uses. And then Imam Ghazali goes through skepticism and seeking truth. And that was because the first step that he had in his seeking of knowledge was in skepticism. He was confused, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. Then kalam, which is his spiritual, uh, kalam is rhetoric, and we'll get into that obviously, as well as philosophy. Then the philosophers and the Batiniya, which are now known as Ismailiya, a different creed. And then last but not least, the Sufis, and a conclusion. We'll talk about that as well. Now, we may finish this in 6 weeks. I don't know, but we're just going to go with it, inshallah. So for this week, we're going to go over who Imam Ghazali was. So we know why we're even talking about him. Imam Ghazali is Abu Ḥāmid Muhammad al-Tusi al-Ghazali, was born or died in the 505 of Hijrah. I think he was born in 450 something Hijri. So in the 11th, 12th century Gregorian, he in modern day Iran, in Tus. He and his older brother were orphaned at a very young age, which then he was bequeathed or left to the hands of a scholar who, wherein from that very young age, he started studying Islam, memorizing Quran, and he grew to being one of the most famous scholars of the time. He studied under a very notable scholar named Imam al-Juwayni, and he excelled. At that time, the Muslim Empire had an entire school system called Nizam al-Mulk, and with the Nizam, it was everywhere was sort of organized in the same way. And so if you started off in the system, you would be taught different things, and from one step you go to the next. Imam Ghazali went from his small town in modern day Iran to being the head judge in Baghdad, the center of the world. So you can imagine now you being a scholar, let's say an academic, and you go from, I don't know, little town, Northern Virginia, all the way to the center of modern day academia. That's what Imam Ghazali was able to do. And the impetus for him doing this was a sincere question. And he said, I've cut and pasted different things from the book itself for us to just focus on. So we're not going to go through the entire book, we're just highlighting key points. So he said, you've asked my brother in religion to communicate to you the aim and secrets of the sciences and the dangers and intricate depths of different doctrines and views. You want me to give you an account of my travail and disengage with the truth from amid welter and sex, despite the polarity of their means and methods. You also want to hear about my daring and mounting from lowland to servile conformism to the highland of independent investigation. So the first point that I want to highlight is that Imam Ghazali didn't write this for the sake of writing it. He didn't want to just write his autobiography and so the world would know. Imam Ghazali, only reason he engaged in writing in this is because he was asked to write this book. Mind you, this is one of the most famous scholars in our history. His book, Iḥyā Ulūm, the revival of Islamic knowledges, is something that has been taught throughout the world, and is still studied today. And so for Imam Ghazali to go from one place to the height of the Islamic academic world at that time, he still didn't choose to do that. The only reason he wrote it was because he was asked. And that's important for us because we have to think about our own lives and how we are engaging with the world. And Imam Ghazali in this book doesn't talk about, it's not an autobiography in the sense that we know autobiographies, how I was raised, who my parents were, what my social economic class was, what my house looked like. This is purely focusing on his intellectual journey. He's only writing this for the means of helping someone else. And for me, this really stands out because how do we engage in personal writing and things of that nature? I'm thinking more specifically about social media. Twitter at first was called microblogging. It was about writing and putting something somewhere that was left for others to benefit from. Yes, I, I'm sorry, I don't. It can't be mad at that. Alhamdulillah. May Allah bless you. And Jazakallah khair, sister, for helping. Um, Salam taikatu. So yeah, when I'm thinking about, again, Imam Ghazali was asked to write this, and he didn't write about anything other than what he says here, the the intricate depths of different doctrines and views. He wrote this to help someone else, to enlighten someone else. And so when we think about how we engage with media in general, what we're doing, how we're engaging, uh, it's something that we should be thoughtful of. It shouldn't just be something that we do for the mere sake of doing it. It shouldn't be, uh, more importantly, for our egos. That's something we really have to check. A lot of times we engage on social media and the internet in general, and it's really to pump up our egos. It's really to show how smart we are. It's really to just uh, descript what we have done and we've accomplished. But what Imam Ghazali is laying down for us here is an instruction manual, is an example for us to think about when we are engaging and what motivating factors we're engaging in and when we're doing it. And he said, you want me to give an account of my travail in engaging the truths from the weltering sects, despite the polarity of their means and methods. You want to hear about my daring mount to the lowland of servile conformances and the highland of independent investigation. And so he's talking about his intellectual journey, but the difference of opinions in those journeys and how, again, as we mentioned a few slides ago, we're going to be going through kalam, which is traditional rhetoric, and Allahumma Muhammad, using rhetoric to understand aqidah and theology, but also philosophy. He goes into who the philosophers were, another sect called the Batiniyah, which was modern Ismailiyah, and then concluding with philosophy. And so, but then he says, you want to hear about my daring mount from the lowland of servitude, servile conformism to highland of independent investigation. Servile conformism here is taqlid, which is blind following, what is generally known as today. And there's nothing wrong with blind following. But Imam Ghazali went from being a mere regular, quote unquote, student of knowledge to being the height of the academic apparatus that existed at that time. And then he still was engaged in a challenging of himself and what he believed, and where he said independent investigation, free from everyone else, really challenging, that's for us, thinking about how we grow up, thinking about what we're taught as children, what we believe as Muslims. Oftentimes it's not challenged, it's not investigated. And that's what Imam Ghazali says that he wants to do here. You can't see what that was. Oh, so the first thing we're thinking about how we prioritize things, I mentioned social media. Imam Ghazali talks about why he wrote that. And so we should think about social media, but we should go a little bit deeper and think about how it is and what is the purpose behind the things that we're saying. What are we saying and what are we doing? That prioritization, just as Imam Ghazali was prioritizing his writing and his engagement, but then also going deeper, thinking about how do we prioritize our lives? If we can start small at the top with low-hanging fruit, if we can start small with just how we're engaging with writing and in general what we're thinking about, then perhaps we can start to change that to being what we're saying and doing. We can take a little bit deeper. And what's most important, which should be the foundation of everything we're doing, how we're prioritizing our lives. The things that are instructing and motivating us with how we're engaging. And so we went through sort of why he wrote that. What did he write? And so he says, first of all, what I derived from the science of kalam. Secondly, what I found loathsome from the methods of defaults to ta'lim. He's talking about a particular sect. Thirdly, the methods of philosophizing, which I scouted. and finally what pleased me from the way and the practice Sufis. What Imam Ghazali does is, throughout this book, was explore every philosophical thing he could find at his time. The traditional academic circle was fueled by deep intellectual Aristotelian philosophy that explained theology. We're talking about the 5th century, beginning of the 6th century Hijri. This is after Muslims have been introduced to philosophy in general, and now it has crept into how we even talk about God, how we describe God. And so he says what he benefited from Kalam, traditional academic studies, what he did not benefit from other intellectual studies, talking specifically about the Ismailiyas, the Batiniya, as he refers to in the book. And thirdly, the methods of philosophy, which he scouted, he used all these things, and then Sufism. And says, you also wish to know the quintessential truth disclosed to me in the tortuous course of my inquiry the tortuous course of my inquiry into the views expressed by various men, and what led me to quit teaching in Baghdad, though I had many students there, and what induced me to resume teaching in Nisapur much later. Convinced of the sincerity of your desires, I am losing no time in answering your quest. Again, as we mentioned in the first part, Imam Ghazali engaged in this because he thought the quest was not only sincere, but he felt that he could benefit others in this. And again, he's talking about his journey, what he did, how he did it, and what took him from the height of heights in political, because if you think about the head teacher in the academic apparatus at that time, also meant that he was a judge, also meant that he had stature, many, many students. He was famous by our modern day understanding. And he left that for what is about 21 years to then live in isolation. Literally, he went for Hajj, found a place, and isolated himself for many, many years until finally he left out, wrote this book, wrote Iḥyā Ulūm, the Revival of Islamic Sciences, and then began teaching once again. So how? We talked about why he wrote it. We talked about what Imam Ghazali wrote in this book. Again, we're still going through the introduction here. How did he start that journey? And he says, in the bloom of my youth, in the prime of my life, from the time I reached puberty, before I was 20 until now, when I'm over 50 years old, I have constantly been diving daringly into the depths of this profound sea and wading into the deep waters like a bold man, not like a cautious coward. What Imam Ghazali is talking about is he spent his entire life devoted to seeking knowledge, to understanding things. And with that, the purpose of this book and the purpose of what we're hoping to benefit from is challenging the things that he was taught and he understood and he believed, constantly pushing back and trying to dive deeper. And this metaphor that he uses is so beautiful, diving daringly into the depths of the profound sea, thinking about the unknown. Imagine when we're challenging status quo, what we've been taught to. Can you wear a baseball cap in the masjid? Oh my goodness, that may be taboo. Should I grow my beard? Can I trim my beard? These are norms, perhaps, that our families say. Can I marry? Should I not marry? Do I need family involvement? These are things that we talk about a lot. Do I need to eat the hamid? Can I buy a home? Can I invest in 401ks? These are modern things that we're talking about. Imam Ghazali is challenging the entire infrastructure, everything that he has been taught up and brought to believe. He now wants to dive deep into the waters like a bold man, not like a cautious coward. And this is strong language, to say that, to not challenge that as a cautious coward. And he says, I would penetrate far into every murky mystery, pounce upon every problem, and dash into every mazy difficulty. He didn't hold any punches writing that, but also in his own life. He didn't let something, because it was too difficult or too challenging, stop him from looking deeper. He didn't think about, well, that's taboo. It wasn't PC. I'm going to get canceled for talking about or researching these things. He's going hard. And again, going back to why he wrote this, it wasn't to bolster his stature anymore. He was already at the top of the top, nor was it to achieve something. It wasn't just intellectual fancy. It was because he needed to know these things. He wanted to know these things for his own self. He said, I would scrutinize the creed of every sect and seek to lay bare the secrets of each faction's teaching with the aim of discriminating between the proponent of truth and advance of error, and between the faithful follower of tradition and the heterodox innovator. He wanted to know, he wanted to find, and let nothing go. And when I read this, it made me think of free diving. That's when you go deep into the ocean without oxygen and you don't have any tanks and you're just diving. This pit with nothing. And that's what Imam Ghazali said. And I'm a very visual learner, and so that's why I'm presenting this. He said, I've constantly been diving daringly into the depths of the profound sea, wading into its deep water like a bold man, not like a cautious coward. Think about this guy diving into here. And I didn't want to play the video because it's like a 4 or 5 minute video. It would take up either too much of our time. You can see that there's absolutely nothing down there. It's pitch black. Think about Imam Ghazali's intellectual journey, going to places that perhaps have not been before. I would penetrate into every murky mystery, pounce upon every problem, and dash into every mazy difficulty. This is what he's doing. This is my attempt to depict his intellectual journey and how difficult and how scary it is. Think about us diving into this just as divers, how that would make us feel. What's down there? Are there sharks? Are the Loch Ness monster? Like, what is there? We don't know. But Imam Ghazali was committed to doing this. And then how did he do it? Again, I'm not reading line for line. We're skipping to find the chunks of it that we can benefit from. The thirst of grasping the real meaning of things was indeed my habit and want from early years and in the prime of my life. It was instinctive, natural disposition placed in my makeup by the God, the Most High, not something due to my own choosing and contriving. As a result, the fetters of servile conformatism, taqlid, blind following, fell away from me, and inherited beliefs lost their hold on me, and when I was still quite young. How Imam Ghazali went to that, he says, is just this was how he was naturally predisposed. He naturally had an inquisitive mind. He naturally could not take things for face value. He needed to go deeper. And I wanted to highlight this because not all of us are that way. And that's fine. Imam Ghazali mentions in another place, which will be the next slide, how this entire apparatus, this entire engagement of deep intellectual theology is not something that everyone's going to engage in. He says in his book, الاعتقاد في الاقتصاد في الاعتقاد, the moderation in belief, which is a very deep intellectual theological text. He mentions the introduction, but honestly, it's probably over my pay grade even. But he mentions in the introduction something that was very, very beautiful. He said, know that the proofs we erected in the science are analogous to the remedies used to treat the ailments of the heart. The physician who prescribes them, if he's not skilled and does not have the acumen and sound judgment, may cause more damage by the remedies than he affects cures. So let him who comprehends the content of his books, remember the moderation and belief, it's a thick theological text he's talking about here. So let him who comprehends the contents of this book benefit from these sciences, these science, know that people are 4 classes. The first of which are a group of people who have faith in God, believe in his messenger, believe and embrace truth, and occupy themselves with worship and or trade. They ought to be left as they are without disturbing their beliefs or encourage them to study the science. He's talking about, and I don't say this as a pejorative, but simple people. People who believe, perhaps our parents or grandparents. You ask them, like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did with the Bedouin woman, where is Allah? She pointed up. Khalas. The Prophet ﷺ said, "A'tiqha fa'innaha muslima." Free her because she's a believer. Not all of us are going to have a predisposition to think deeply and interrogate theology, interrogate public beliefs and understandings. But if we do have that, then we are trying to use Imam al-Ghazali. And I would argue that while the depths in which each and one of us goes into thinking about these things and exploring is going to be different. But in our modern day, when we're bombarded with understandings and perspectives and views that perhaps are new to our community, we need to wrestle with these ideas. And so, like Imam Ghazali, if there are anything or any ideas or philosophical understandings or anything that comes to us that confuses us, that challenges our belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or our fundamental understanding of the Sharia, of Islam as a whole, then we need to be like Imam Ghazali. We need to be courageous and dive deep into understanding what that is. Now, again, we don't need to go write a whole book. We don't need to go off in the seclusion for 20 years. Alhamdulillah, you have a community, you have a imma. If I can't find it, I'll ask my teachers, I'll consult other peers. We'll get an answer, inshallah. But the point here is that we need to explore and dive deep and be courageous to understand what we think that we understand and ensure that we're doing it in a healthy way. But also, if anything challenges that, we do what is needed to remedy that. So why? He said, I wanted to sift out uncritical beliefs, the beginning of which are suggestions imposed from without, since there are differences of opinion in discernment of those that are true from those that are false. So he wanted to, he was not sufficed with pure belief. Imam Ghazali, again, we're still going through the introduction here. When we're thinking about why he did this, he wasn't okay with, belief for the sake of belief. He said, I wanted to sift out, if you could think about a sifter, some sand, and it filters out the small things. He said, I wanted to sift out uncritical beliefs. And when you have a sifter, you're thinking about analyzing everything, the beginnings of which are suggestions imposed from without. Think about our upbringing. We grew up as Muslims, or we embraced Islam. These are just things that are imposed on us. And the difference of opinion in the discerning of those that are true from falsehood. So I began to say to myself, what I seek is knowledge of true meanings of things. Of necessity, therefore, I must inquire into just what the true meaning of knowledge is. Again, what I seek is knowledge of the true meanings of things. Of necessity, therefore, I must inquire just what true meaning of knowledge is. If I want to know what the knowledge of things are, I need to know what knowledge is. Then it became clear to me. It became clear to me that sure and certain knowledge is that which the thing known is made so manifest that no doubt clings to it, nor is it accompanied by a possibility of error or deception, nor can the mind even suppose such a possibility. So he says, certain knowledge is that which is known, is made, the thing known is made manifest, there's no doubt clings to it. We know it, that it's unshakable. Nor is it accompanied by possibility of error. We have no doubt in it. Nor can the mind even suppose such a possibility. And so we all go through these things. I, alhamdulillah, bifadlillah ta'ala, spent 10 years studying Islam, then spent 3 years academically studying theology. We're all going to be questioned and tested. Sometimes we're going to have things, well, this new issue has come about. What does Islam say about that? Is our belief unwavering? Is our belief able to remedy the question? Or do our emotions or does our mind sometimes become in conflict with our hearts? That's what Imam Ghazali says he did what he did. That's why he sought this out. And so in closing, in summary, just to open the floor for discussion and Q&A, inshallah, to summarize, who is Imam Ghazali? Imam Ghazali was a scholar from the 5th, 6th century, at the beginning of the 6th century Hijri. He died 505 after the Hijrah, who reached the height of heights of the intellectual apparatus at that time and left it all for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to inquire into the depths, to challenge himself into what it was. And he was asked to recount his spiritual journey. And he only agreed because he saw that it would benefit others. We mentioned on this that we should think about what we prioritize and how we engage in the world, making sure that what we are prioritizing is going to benefit not only us, but the others, particularly for us that are on social media, what we write, how we write it, and what we're saying. Just to lower the ice a little bit, I had a very interesting thought yesterday. wherein I took a quote from Imam Ghazali from this book. From him, I preparing it, I come across a lot of nice quotes. And something that George Orwell says in a book called 1984. It's a dystopian science fiction novel that is famous. And I put them together in my mind, made sense of it, sent it to one of my friends who's like my intellectual thought partner. We bounce ideas off each other all day long, pontificating, armchair philosophers. He was like, man, that's amazing. Bringing together the classical and the new. I said, should I put it on Twitter, bro? He said, yeah, do it, man. I said, okay, I'll put it on Twitter. And I thought about, why am I putting it on Twitter? First of all, this is really nuanced and probably is not going to change anyone's life. It's not going to help anyone. Like, oh, wow. And it's not really going to make any difference. And I don't know why, but my desire to even put it online then made me think, maybe I want to be known as the guy who had this really profound thought. Maybe it's my own ego now that is interested in seeing what other people say, the mentions, as they say. And so I'm being very, very transparent here. I actually got off social media at the beginning of 2019 because it just was too much. I felt myself being motivated by what I was writing. I was in school. I was finishing up my master's at the time, and I was in class, and someone asked about Islam. It was a non-Muslim. He didn't ask about, excuse me, he asked about the church. He was like, bro, I need to talk to you because I'm having problems in the church. And I was like, what? You want to talk to me as a Muslim about your problems in the church? But because you like me, you feel confident? I was like, man, a non-Muslim asked me, blah, blah, blah. And right before I hit send, I was like, oh my God, this is another form of humble bragging. I said, I need to stop. This is way too dangerous, let alone, so I stopped posting. I haven't stopped reading. I got back into reading Twitter a few months ago. And even that, I'm now like debating because now it makes me think things about people. So this guy's stupid. He keeps saying this unintellectual things. This person's doing the same thing that I'm mad at. And now I'm sinning myself. And so, again, we just need to question why we're doing what we're doing, why we're saying what we're saying, why we're writing what we're writing, and why we're engaging in what we're engaging in. Next, what Imam Ghazali, he studied Kalam and the methodology of the philosophers, the Batiniyya and the Sufis, and he left his post in search of this. How his entire life he courageously scrutinized every sect and belief, refusing to conform from a young age. Why? To sift out uncritical beliefs and discern truth from falsehood, and to find the true meanings of things. I'm going to stop sharing here, inshallah, and open the floor for discussion, for Q&A.